Well, I really appreciate the youth band this morning. They did a great job, and we appreciate them. They've grown up so quickly. And having just celebrated 12 years here at Stones Hill, it's amazing because many of them were, well, what would that be, first grade or so when I first met them. And now some of them are getting ready to launch out of high school in a few years. So God has been really good, and it's just great to see them. They've grown up to be such handsome and beautiful people. And you are handsome and beautiful this morning. We're so glad that you're here. I had a question asked of me earlier this summer when I was visiting my daughter in Kansas City on a very hot and warm day. And she asked me a question, what's something new you're learning about Jesus? And I had to think about that, and it seemed like that's always kind of on the back burner of my mind. And that question, I went on to talk to you a little bit about that, and then that question has kind of evolved into a little mini-series here this summer. And the series is really, the kind of underlying question for the whole series is really, what is something new that we can learn about Jesus? And maybe that's you today. Maybe there's something new you're learning about Jesus. Or you would like to learn about Jesus. And if so, you've been tracking with this now for a few weeks, and that's awesome. And I hope that you can learn something new about Jesus. Really every week, but something new about His Word. And of course, the Word points to Him in so many ways. But we've talked about the gentleness of Jesus. We've talked about the furious love of Jesus. We've talked about the authority of Jesus. A very insightful passage last week. And then today we're going to be talking about the discernment of Jesus. And He was very discerning. He knew what was in man. There's one place that says in the Gospels. And He knows what's in us. And He was a very discerning individual, and we need that same sense of discernment as well in our lives. But He had a high level of discernment. You know, this week had a situation. For some reason, our backyard has become a kind of a ecosystem for robins. Anybody else have robins nesting in your front porches or in the backs of your houses or on little light fixtures on the external light? You know, they just build nests everywhere, and it's just awesome to kind of watch them. There's like 3 or 4 different nests, and so they've been hatching. It seems like hatching birds for a long time, but there was a baby robin out of the nest this week, and I can usually do okay, but it seems like the older I get, the more sentimental I've become, and about things like that. And of course, I kind of saw it, and then I was like, I hope Donette does not see that, because if she sees it, I bet she's going to want to do something. And sure enough, she had seen it, and I'm glad that she did, because I was able to get the ladder out, and it felt so gratifying to take that little baby robin. And when we picked that little guy up, you know, his neck just stretches out, and as soon as the contact was made, his beak opens up, and half of him disappears because that beak is so huge. It's amazing how big their beaks are at just such a young age. Like half of him disappears, and he's wanting, you know, he's hungry, and it just felt so good to drop him in the nest. And then, of course, I was curious, and so I got online to check and see if truly a human being touches the young like that, if they will reject the young. And that's kind of a fable. Mainly, they'll keep caring for their young regardless of that. It's just the nest disturbing. If the nest has been disturbed or there's other threats around the nest, then sometimes they will abandon the nest. But it felt so good to drop it in, and then lo and behold, there was, I think maybe later that day or the next day, there was 2 baby robins on the ground. And I think Levi got in on some of that action before we took him back to Fort Knox this past week. And he helped them put them back up in the nest, and same response. And you know, I don't know a lot about Emily Dickinson, the poet. She was kind of reclusive. She kind of wore her hair long and had a bun, but as is so often the case, for poets and some artists, you don't recognize the value of what they produce until they're gone, and that was the case in her life. She was kind of a recluse and never got invited to parties and things, so she just kind of spent a lot of time in her room and in her backyard and things. And I thought of something that, as all this Robin thing was unfolding, I thought of something that she wrote. I couldn't tell you another thing that she wrote, but I remember this line from one of her poems, that if I can but help a robin to his nest again, I will not have lived in vain. If I can but help a robin to his nest again, I will not have lived in vain. There she is, a poet. Hair in a bun on the back of her head, very plain-spoken person. Her sister discovered her stash of poetry after she was gone. And the rest is infamy and history. Very powerful, insightful, and so many times it's the poets that take us deep. It's the poets that have time to think, and they're not celebrating at the parties and all the social scenes and things. They're at home thinking it over. And that was her life. And as I think about that, I think about that poem, I think about us, I think about Stones Hill, I think about your lives, that if, each week that we come, in a way, it's looking at the Word, it's trying to make sense of Jesus, it's trying to make sense of the Bible. Most people feel like that's a special book, and they want to know why, they want to have it explained, they want to have it make sense. And I was talking to Levi on the way down to Fort Knox, after he slept from the time we left the house to about the time we hit Indianapolis, and then he woke up. And so we had a pretty good conversation back and forth from Indianapolis to Louisville or somewhere thereabouts. And then I can tell he kind of starts tensing up a little bit because it's going to come time to check in. He's doing basic this for a month down there. And so, but I was sharing with him. I said, I went through a time in my life where, you think about your significance and you think about making an impact and touching the lives of other people. And maybe that Emily Dickinson thought kind of filters its way in, and you don't want to live your life in vain. Whatever helping a robin to the nest might mean, you hope that you can do what needs to be done. And so I kind of went through a tough time where I had to really define some things for myself. And one of my life purpose statements that came out of that time of definition, that time of questioning, a time of uncertainty, one of my life purpose statements, and I really think everybody ought to have a life purpose statement. What is the purpose of your life? At least one of the primary purposes of your life. And be able to answer that. Be able to share that with people. And so I had to think over a long time. And one of the things I came out of there with was one of my purposes for life is to simplify biblical information such that it can be used in your life in a practical, understandable, and in an easier way. That's one of the reasons God put me on the planet, is to simplify biblical information such that you can use it and you can understand it, and to take the mystery and the enigma and all the huge questions. Maybe I'll answer all of them, but to reduce them down such that this is not such an intimidating book. Okay? And in a way, I just shared with Levi, I said, that's my way of putting the robin back in the nest. Each week, if I can do that for you and for us. And if we as a church can take that on as a serious effort every week to talk out of the Bible and to talk about things like what's something new we're learning about Jesus. To take that on. I listen to podcasts from churches, mega churches. I mean churches that are 5,000, 25,000, 35,000 on a weekend. It's crazy. Yet in those same sermon talks, I don't hear anybody making a serious effort to really understand those kinds of questions. What does the Bible mean? How does it work? They want to talk about the latest movies, the top songs, and they dress it up in all these fancy homiletical clothing, and it looks good, it sounds good, and people, oh yeah, that's great. But it's like, I don't think I learned one single new thing about Jesus today when I listened to that guy talk. That's what we're about here at Stones Hill. That's why this is unique. This is a unique place, because we're committed to that priority. And that's my way of putting the robin back in the nest. I will not have lived in vain if the spiritual life has been simplified and made a little easier for you. And you can live with a sense of purpose and know that a serious, concentrated effort has been placed in understanding what this book is trying to say and what Jesus is saying to you this morning. You see? And so this is our priority. This is our core value. And this is unique. This is why being here each week is important. It's why it's what makes Stones Hill unique. And there's a lot of other ways, but that's one of the ways. And it's my way of putting the robin back in the nest again. If I can help but put a robin back in his nest again, I will not have lived in vain. I'll tell you another little story, maybe to wrap it up today, related to that. And what I want to do is I want to just share with you some questions, kind of where I was going to end the message. And so I'll share these questions with you, and I want you to start thinking about them. And then also as a way of reflective response. Sometimes I get tired of listening to me talk, okay? And I can't help but think that maybe hearing truth from other people from time to time is helpful to you as well. And so I thought what I would do is just let the Holy Spirit tap you on the shoulder today. And maybe somebody here would be like, you know what, this is what I'm learning new about Jesus. And so I ask you the question that my daughter asked of me, and it kind of got me thinking, what is something new you're learning about Jesus? Something new, maybe something recently discovered in your life. And then if we really can't respond to that, it's almost like a challenge. It's like, oh, the implication is I should always be learning something new about Jesus. I should always be thinking thoughts about Jesus, right? And if we're not really sure if we're learning anything new about Jesus, well then let's get on the journey to start learning something new. And so jump in here and keep tracking along with us, because I think you're going to see a new insight in Jesus. Okay, we take the hard stuff on. If it means talking about Jesus cleansing the temple twice, we'll do that. And we'll be honest with the text and not ignore the hard things. All right? And we kind of did that last week. But I want to read you these questions, kind of where I was going to wrap up here today. Okay. Have I sufficiently beat that horse to death this morning as far as what we are about and what the uniqueness of a Stones Hill journey is like and what it's meant to be like? Okay, it's meant to be about Jesus. It's meant to be about growing spiritually, and that's why we're here, and that's why you're here. So praise God. All right, but here's the questions: are you building bigger barns? For what reason? Okay. Number 2, are you ready to be called home? Could happen at any time. Number 3, has the grammar of your life ever been predominantly in the first person singular? I want, I need, I did. And you're going to notice today in our reading, you're going to see 2 very common occurring words. One is I, says it a bunch of times, and one is me or myself. And the question that I have then is, has the grammar of your life ever been predominantly in the first person singular? I want, I need, I did. Or myself. And then the final question, and it'll be apparent to you after we kind of work our way through this. Are you rich toward God? Very important question. And what we're going to see here today is that Jesus, the kind of the something new we're learning about Jesus here this morning is that he was a very discerning individual, and he still is discerning. There's going to be an incident here in Luke 12 where something provoked a teaching, and it was Jesus was talking about something else. A guy kind of comes and interrupts. He's got a family inheritance, and the way this worked, someone evidently has died, and the father probably has died without an oral or written will, and there was an estate that was held by 2 brothers, and according to the common custom of the time, the inheritance couldn't be divided until the older brother agreed. And so they had a lot of clout, a lot of authority in a family went to the older brother. And so there's this unnamed man in the crowd. He wanted Jesus to make his brother divide some inherited property fairly. And Jesus refuses to be involved in the arbitration. He's not denigrating or rejecting the idea of law and legal systems and justice at all. He's not downcasting that, okay? But what he says is, I'm not going to be involved in this because I've come for a different reason, different purpose. And if I start arbitrating in family matters like this, it's going to really sidetrack things. It's not part of what God has called me to do at this time. And so really, the guy, it's not so much that he wants Jesus to declare a statement of justice. He wants Jesus to choose his side so that he can get more money from the estate that evidently he feels he's due and he should receive. And so he wants some free advice. And it wasn't uncommon for people to go to rabbis or spiritual figures like this and ask them to make a ruling on things like this. And so Jesus was definitely seen as someone, notorious and reputable, someone who had discernment, someone who had insight. But as we go to slide 3, if you would, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me judge or an arbiter between you?" It's not an insult when Jesus says to him, man. It's not an insult, but neither, the commentators will tell you, is it a term of endearment. We might say, dude. It's informal. Dude, who appointed me judge or an arbiter between us? You're in my friend zone, but I'm not sure where you're headed with the question. Dude, man. Think about what you're doing here, what you're asking me. Who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? And why pull me into this? And so what Jesus says here is, in other words, it's not my mission to make this kind of a priority. I have a limited amount of time, and that's not what I'm here to do. And by the way, if I could say right here, if you're ever... of course, all of us are in families and things, but if you would do your family a favor and help them avoid these unnecessary conflicts and clashes after your departure, it would be of immense value to them. Make sure there's a will and put it where people can find it. So we don't have these kinds of confusing situations, guys that are interrupting the great rabbi trying to teach and proclaim a message of the gospel, and they're interrupting the rabbi over things like this. And so put your will, make a will, put it where people can find it. Discuss things before your death. That's important. Clarify arrangements and set your family up, because you don't want this kind. You've got enough to deal with in someone's absence that we love. And to leave them in a place of confusion is such a cruel thing to do. And so I don't know who that's meant for this morning, but just take your time to make sure these things can get, you can set your family up to be able to proceed without this unnecessary conflict. So anyway, this guy though is definitely there. There's a conflict brewing in his family, and he said to them, verse 15, Jesus said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed." Watch out, he says. And he means for us to ask questions. To watch out means to be suspicious. To watch out means to ask questions. I'm going to propose at least 5 questions. It's in your YouVersion app as a helpful guide to help us get at what Jesus is trying to get at here and what we need to be thinking about. But greed is when money or things are too important to us. And notice that there's more than one kind, according to Jesus. He says, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. You can always look at other people's kind of greed and say, oh, how crazy that is, how awful that is, and not see your own greed. It comes in stripes and textures and layers, and it comes in different ways that we think about things. And it may not just be money, it may be other things. And so Jesus goes on to say, life does not consist in abundance of possessions. And so this family is being torn apart by greed, and there's kind of a money sickness, a money centricity that drives this family. There's a materialistic heart at the core of it. And maybe it's in this man, and maybe it's in his brother. I don't know. But the point is, Jesus says, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. And perhaps this entire message this morning hinges on this very important insight and a very important assumption that's behind Jesus' statement. A very discerning thing that he sees. And there's an assumption when he says, watch out, be on guard against all kinds of greed. And the assumption is that greed is something that's hidden from you. It's hidden from me. It's hidden. It's not readily apparent. It will deceive you. It will fool you. Jesus is assuming blindness to the condition of money sickness as intrinsic to the condition. In other words, blindness to the condition is a part of it. You see that? You don't know it. We're greedy and we don't know it. We have these other false gods in our life and we don't see it. We're blind to it. And that's part of it. That's a part of the illness. And so Jesus very discerningly sees this. He sees this blindness to the condition as a part of it. And so greed and materialism, by its very nature, it hides from you. And that's why Jesus has to say, watch out. Be on your guard. It can sneak into your life. And many times it's there and you don't even know it. Watch out. Be on guard against greed. And I don't know of any other place where Jesus says it in quite the same way about any other topic. For example, he doesn't say, watch out, be on your guard against adultery. Why doesn't he say it that way? Because we usually know when we're up to that. It's pretty obvious when that's happening in our life. Almost always you know when you're going down that path. But when you are going down a path of soul-destroying, life-changing, family-fracturing, a path of greed like this, and materialism and money-centricity, Jesus has to say, watch out, because he discerns that we all are very easily led astray in this area, and we're blind to it. Nobody who's materialistic ever feels like they're materialistic. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Well, I'm not materialistic. And we defend and we look at other people who are better off than we are in areas of life maybe of interest to us. And they have the issues, not me. And what we don't realize, it's never based on amounts and the acquisition of more things. Greed is an attitude. It's a way of defining life. It's a way of living life. And it's a way of excluding God, because you have another center in your life. So you know, and I know, that there are greedy people around. But everybody sees them, but nobody thinks it's them. That's the problem. And Jesus sees it. And he says, watch out. You know, I'm not a chainsaw guy. But some of you are, and you do a great job cutting down trees and things. And I just kind of think of this when I think of someone tells me, watch out, be on your guard. And you know what? A guy like me with a chainsaw, okay, I would want to listen to whoever told me that, because, you know, the chainsaw has incredible power and incredible ability to do a lot of good things. But if you're not careful and that tree gets in a pinch and that thing kicks out of there on you, it can do incredible damage. And so we have to be so careful, Jesus says. He says, watch out, be careful. Just like when you're using a powerful tool that can do a lot of damage, you got to be careful in how you're viewing things in your life, whether it's money or land or whatever it is, antique car or, you know, older car, whatever it is you collect, whatever it is that your value. Okay, he says, be careful, watch out. Blindness to the condition is part of the condition. We don't see it. Verse 16. And he to give further insight, he tells them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. Okay, it's a bumper crop. And I love farmers. I love what they do. And I know some of the farmers in different places are really struggling because, you know, the corn is not that nice, deep, dark green, and it's smaller and it's pale looking, and there's some places, and the rain has really impacted that. But in this case, this guy, this farmer, Jesus references him as a certain rich man, and he's a farmer, and he has an abundant yield. I mean, he's got more bushels per acre than he's ever had before, and he's done the same amount of work, but yet somehow the yield has come in, and it's more than he's ever had to come in. God has been so good to him. He worked the same amount, but he got so much more. It's such a gift from God. And he's got a question, what am I going to do with the surpluses? And so verse 17, slide number 4, he thought to himself. Literally, the text says he dialogued with himself. And I think it's interesting, one commentary writer who has spent years in the Middle East has a very interesting insight on that particular point. He says, in the Middle East, village people make decisions about important topics after long discussions with their friends. Families, communities, and villages are tightly knit together. Everybody's business is everybody else's business. Even trivial decisions are made after hours of discussion with family and friends. But this man appears to have no friends. And he lives in isolation from the human family around him. And with an important decision to make, the only person with whom he can have a dialogue is himself. The condition is intrinsic to the condition. He's blind. He has his eye on this priority in his life and what he's going to do with this extra yield, and people and relationships have become unimportant to him. He's shoved that to the side, and so by the time we reach him in the story, we have a literary device, a literary convention used by Luke to communicate the isolation. It's a soliloquy. We are given insight onto this guy's personal thoughts. When he's in his lonely, quiet moments, we're given insight into what he's thinking in his heart and his mind. What shall I do? What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. You following this? He had a legitimate problem, right? For a time, things could have gone either way here. A blessing to others, or he can be a blessing to others, or he can be a hoarder. And so he's on a razor's edge here. He can go either way. He has this internal dialogue. You know, maybe if he had a good friend that he hadn't isolated, maybe they could help give some perspective. Or maybe if he heard a good sermon or somehow opened his life up to God right about now, it could have been different for him. But as we're going to see here, he opted to do something. He opted to do something that excluded God out of his life. In verse 18, then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. So in a time when you didn't have banks, this is the first century equivalent of building your portfolio. You built bigger barns. And verse 19, and I'll say to myself, self, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, be merry. And the way this is set up, it's like Jesus it's almost like a yada yada yada. You've heard this before. There's no commas in there when you read that, and it's like eat, drink, and be merry. We've been down this path before, and we can just hurry through these enumerated items in such a way because it's going to lead to a climax at the end of the story that's going to trump all these eating, drinking, and marrying parties that he had envisioned. And so Jesus is like, eat, drink, be merry, telling the story, yada, yada, yada. You've heard it all before. How many people have oriented their life? Forget the robins out of the nest. Getting them back in, just help one. No. It's going to be eat, drink, and be merry. That's my life purpose. That's my goal. It's not about helping some little hungry robin to the nest again and not living life in vain. You see, he lost. He's lost. He's missing. He's disoriented. He's inebriated. He's blind, and he can't see the blindness. That's what greed is. It's intrinsic to the condition. Jesus discerns it. He sees it, and he can see it in us as well. And he's more than happy
church to come in alongside us and gently love us and show us the way and help us to see and discern what it is in our lives, maybe, that's become more of a life purpose. That's bumping another greater life purpose out of our life. Jesus is that kind of a Savior. He's that kind of a friend. And so we know what this guy's thinking now as we read our way through this story. He's thinking, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go on one last building project. Storage is a problem. The yield is great. But I'm going to go ahead and go on a building project. This is going to be my life focus. And then I'm going to retire. I'm going to take it easy. I'm going to take a deep breath, exhale, settle in for a long retirement. And this is what he was saying to himself inside on those quiet Mediterranean evenings, between his bites of fish and olives and figs. That's what I'm going to do. And greed had grabbed his inner essence, and it had led him to some dangerous conclusions, some mistakes in how he chose to live his life. Well, we're going to see this, and so we know what the guy was saying to himself, but the question I got is, what was God saying to him? And what is God saying to us? Verse 20, but God said to him, "You fool." You know, God doesn't call people that name that often. So it's a pretty big deal. It's not a reference to mental ability. The guy was a great business guy. He was a great farmer. He had so many talents. Farming takes I just have the utmost respect for farmers. It's the way they manage the crops, and they plant and they work with they improvise given the conditions of weather and things. It's just amazing men and women who do this. So this guy was talented. He had ability. He had business acumen. He was entrepreneurial-like. He had so many things going for him, and yet God calls him a fool, and it's a term that references our spiritual discernment. It's a term that references we never saw our blind spot. We lived our whole life, and we never saw the blind spot. We did all of these things, and we never saw the blind spot. We never took the time to do what Jesus actually asked us to do. Be careful. Watch your heart. Watch what you let get in that heart, and watch what you let become this. Be careful about what your life purpose becomes, and be careful, because this thing can get its tentacles around you, and you think it's somebody else. Okay, and so the guy has a lot of money, all right. So he's got a lot of things going for him, but God still calls him a fool. And he had some, like I said, a lot of the great mental abilities, bumper crops, profit, great business, building program. And the question, I think, that's at God's heart this morning, and I think that Jesus is discerning, is all the resources we've been entrusted with, are they going to serve us, or will we use them to do good in the time that we are allowed to have them, because we won't keep them forever? That's the question. Am I just going to feather my own nest, or am I going to help a robin to its nest again? And let that be part of my life purpose, and know that if I can just help one of you turn a little more toward Jesus, if I could just help one stay in an I love you marriage, if I could just help one understand the spiritual life just a little bit more, that they'll stay with it and not abandon the journey. If I could just help one understand that particular verse and that concept in such a way that they get it and it changes them, my life, my ministry, my purpose will not have been in vain. There's been good accomplished. And see, when that's your life purpose, God can use that. But this guy is blinded to that. He's blinded to the robins that need to be hoisted to the nest again. Very sobering. The story takes a very sobering turn. And just stay with me. You know my pattern. I like to explain the text, help you make sure we know what we've got in front of us here on our table. And I'm going to ask you 5 questions. I'm going to bring this baby into an application focus here that's going to help us ask some questions about our own hearts, okay? To reveal the blindness maybe that's kind of sneaked into our hearts and our lives, all right? So stay with me here. It's my pattern. You know what we're about here. But notice what it says. It says, this very night, your life will be demanded from you. Notice this very night phrase. That could work at the end of the sentence. Your life will be demanded from you this very night. But it's in the primary position of the sentence. Why? For emphasis' sake. Why is it first? Why is it placed first in the sentence? For emphasis' sake. There's no more time. There's no more time to change. This very night, there's no time to amend the ways. And when I saw that, it humbled me. Just the positioning of that phrase in the sentence, it humbles me. It touches me. It moves me. It breaks me. Because I know there's so many people who have the pedal down in life, and they're pursuing what it is. That's the primary thing of their life. And they're pursuing it at breakneck speed, fast and furious. And they wake up one day, and that's their last day. And they realize, oh my goodness, I'm not ready to go. I want to eat and drink and be merry some more. My goodness, this very night. You see, greed placed its foot on the pedal. And his years clipped by so quickly. And now he's down to a single night. But he couldn't see it because he's blind to it. It's intrinsic to the condition. He can't see it. To his last day of life, he refused to see anything different other than the life he had chosen. Your life will be demanded from you. The word demanded is a commercial term. It's used of a loan. God has loaned life to us, and at any time, God has loaned life to us. And at any time He can call in the loan. There's a lot I like about this guy. A lot. But he had prepared for every harvest except for this one, when he himself would be cut down. And that's why I say, if your life is on loan from God, which it is, if the loan is called in, are you ready? You know, a part of me wishes this guy had a little more time. He had everything, and yet he had nothing. So many good things to like about him. Eat and drink and be merry. We all like to do that, don't we? Successful business. But he had no friends, no family. Nothing by which to even stand before God and present a life well lived. And Jesus, this the ultimate discerner, he just can cut through so many things. And he does here. And he asked, then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? You see, the way this story moves is that goods are given, they are stored, and they're left. He's leaving everything behind. The barns he built, the farm hands that undoubtedly helped him run this operation that he controlled, the prestige he had acquired, death has stripped him bare. And just like the man is fighting with his brother and other siblings over the father's estate, the one who interrupted Jesus and prompted this story, someday someone will fight over his estate, and he will leave it all behind. Jesus in verse 21 says, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. He was an employer, a builder, an investor. But barn by barn, he grew further and further away from his true purpose in life. The little robins that need help to the nest again were not a priority to him. Barn by barn, the people in his life grew distant. Barn by barn, his wealth seems to have isolated from all human contact, meaningful relationships. He thought everyone was out for his money. Barn by barn, he wasn't free to be what God could have used him in the lives of other people around him. He never consulted with God or anybody else. So by the time we reach him in the story, this employer, this builder, this investor, this entertainer had become so isolated, he talks only to himself. And based on how Jesus characterizes this man, in all likelihood, there was underneath all of that, there was a core in his life. A core of greed. And based on how he characterizes him, he was more than likely preparing to charge a higher price for his grain in case of famine. He could sell the surplus and make a bundle. Bigger barns would have accommodated that goal. Buy low, sell high, and use people's hunger to make a fortune. And Jesus says, you're going to leave it all behind. True discernment means not only distinguishing the right from the wrong, it means distinguishing the primary from the secondary, the essential from the indifferent, the permanent from the transient, the good, the better, sometimes the better and the best. A discerning person is able to see what's obscure. They're able to see the blind spots. Able to see what's not readily evident. And Jesus' discernment penetrated to the deepest reaches of the heart. And this morning I just want to transition to talk about these 5 questions just quickly here at the New YouVersion app. Based on this story, based on what we see in this. And I'm sorry for being emotional this morning. When I was studying this week, I just did just what I just did here. It just touched me. And I hate to see life go in this direction, because I know what life can potentially be, and the resources that God has entrusted to us, and the good that can be accomplished through those, and to be blinded to that possibility and potential. It's a very saddening thing. But I want to note with you, again, it's in the YouVersion app, there's 5 questions. They're L words that help you with your memory, and then also just to kind of help guide this thing. 5 questions to reveal what's hidden. 5 questions to help us to see what we don't see in ourselves. We can see in everybody else, but not ourselves. 5 questions. Number 1, what are my loves? What are your loves this morning? Augustine said the main problem in your life is that your heart is filled with disordered loves. Disordered loves. Yes, your loves are out of order, he would say. There's nothing wrong with working for money or cherishing children or building a career, but you've made good things into ultimate things, Augustine would say. They're out of order. They're inordinate loves. Your loves are out of order. My team or my lifestyle, my barns, my security, my independence, my awards and recognition, my romance, these things are, and if we make a human relationship our number one love, you'll have these huge expectations and make ultimate demands from a person that you're looking to meet all of the needs in your life. You'll make them fill a role that only God can fill. So greed takes many different shapes and forms and sizes. And so Jesus says, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. And the question this morning is, can you reorder your love such that Jesus Christ is lifted up? We're disordered in our loves. And so the invitation, the question, what are my loves? What are your loves? And think about that for a little bit. What are my loves? Number 2, what are my longings? You know, this guy pictured himself living the good life, didn't he? Eat, drink, be merry. Do you know that every one of you have had a life that you have imagined, that there's longings in your heart and your life where you've pictured the good life in certain ways, and we coddle the visions of life we most desire, and these longings set the trajectory of our love and decisions, and if we're not careful, there'll be a robin screaming or trying to reach out for food on the ground of life, and we'll ignore them because we've got a bigger longing in life that's more important to us. What do you long for? If you were to get real with your heart imaginations, Pastor Joey, here's the life I've pictured. This is the life I have imagined for myself someday. You know, we long for all kinds of things. Relationships and success and even revenge and acceptance and attention and affection and things. And we must constantly evaluate what we long for per the words of Jesus, who had this incredible discernment into our heart and our minds and how we work. And He says, watch out. Be careful about anything that you love that cannot love you back. Be careful, He says. And so we've got to constantly evaluate it. Like a guy with a chainsaw who doesn't know what he's doing. Things can cut us deeply and harm our lives if we're not careful. Be careful. We crave a sense of fulfillment and significance. And it's not a bad craving. But we have to watch what we take it to. And to what are you looking to? What has defined a life of significance for you? And Jesus says, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Can we redefine, can we reimagine a new longing to lift up Jesus with our life? I think we can. And rather than demand attention, find the contentment of anonymity. Rather than strive for acceptance or likes or notifications on our social media accounts, just resting in who we are in Jesus, regardless of how many red numbers we got. Rather than fantasize over revenge, move in a direction that is so exciting that revenge is pushed out. Rather than longing for someone to love us and meet every need, can we imagine what our lives might be like if we made it our purpose to let every person feel our love? I ask you this morning, what are my loves? Number 2, what are my longings? Number 3, what are my loyalties? Again, it's in your YouVersion app on your smartphone. The rich guy said no to many important things in his life. There were family weddings he missed. There were funerals he refused to attend. There were reunions he neglected to go to. If he was from West Virginia or Kentucky, he'd had at least one of those a year. And maybe more. Spiritual growth opportunities he said no to. Personal enrichment opportunities. They didn't know his face in the synagogue. He didn't. That wasn't a priority to him. Gathering like this wasn't a priority to this guy. He said no to that. There were a lot of orphaned robins on the ground in the backyard of his life, and he never took the time because that wasn't important to him. He said no to those things because this was his all-consuming passion. And the caution here is whether or not our heart is drawn to things that are worthy or unworthy of our loyalty. We may not face an ultimatum decision where if we profess Christ we lose our lives, but our loyalties are tested every day by the things that attempts to pull our hearts away from the Lord, from Christ. And that's demonstrated by where we spend our time. And every parent would say they love their children more than their iPhones. I know that they would, because that's the textbook answer. But the true test of our loyalty happens when they have to choose whether to devote their attention to children or their social media accounts. And Jesus says, watch out, be on guard against all kinds of greed. And I ask the question, can we take our biggest loyalties to be can we take our biggest loyalties and be a ministry to others through it? Can we realign our loyalties? What's your loyalties? What's the stuff you make time for? That'll tell you. What takes your time? What do you give your time to? That's insight to where you are here, you see. And so, another question, what are my labors? His job was his life, and that's, it's good to love what we do and do a good job at that, but it defined everything else about his life. We are more than our jobs, but this guy, it was all about his job. And, a lot of teenagers are better at video games, and that's their labor, than they are at relationships. And a lot of adults know the plot lines of their favorite soap operas or romance novels better than any of the drama happening in their teenager's life. We work at that stuff. That becomes our labor. Our labor is what gets a dedicated and focused effort. We dedicate and focus so much effort, you see, and so this reveals maybe some blind spots. That question. Finally, what are my loves? What are my longings? What are my loyalties? What are my labors? And finally, what are my liturgies? You know what this guy's liturgy was? And liturgy is kind of an old religious word that talks about creating rhythms and patterns and habits where you kneel and you sing and you pray, and you do that routinely every week, and God uses the routines to speak to us sometimes. It's liturgy. It's the form of worship, and it's kind of a religious word. But I'm using it a little different way this morning, and I'm asking you, what are your liturgies? This guy's liturgy, you know what his was? It wasn't kneeling, singing, and praying. It was eating and drinking and being merry. That was his liturgy. That was what he's going to live his life for. That was going to be his pattern. I'm going to eat, I'm going to drink, I'm going to be merry. I'm going to do it all again the next weekend. And so, my question to us this morning is, what are our liturgies? And can we adopt new patterns? Can we be intentional in living a lifestyle that counteract the bad stuff we see in our world? What about a family meeting one night a week? It's so important. Everything hinges on that, where the dad leads that family and prays for that family, interacts with that family and resolves conflict with that family and casts a vision for what he wants the family to be once a week. What about that liturgy? Or what about a smartphone-free space at dinner time? That's hard to do, isn't it? Or attending church once a week, or scheduling a date with your spouse, and maybe your children at least monthly, or remembering to take a family trip each year, or just so much of our life liturgies don't take us where we want to go in our heart of hearts, and we're blind to it. We can't see it. And so the challenge this morning from a very discerning Jesus is, watch out, be on guard, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. And the question is, what are my liturgies or habits or patterns that enable me to prioritize better things and to lift up Jesus? So something happened that this guy never expected. God called him to give an account. And someday we'll be in the same situation. Somebody said the inconsolable longing is knowing what you could have done something more with your life, but you chose not to. And now time has passed you by, and it's time to give an account. Kind of a sobering thought, isn't it? But every single one of us in this room this morning has something that we treasure. And those 5 questions, if we're honest with ourselves, will get at what those things are. There's something in us that we look to for security and beauty and ultimate treasure. It's the my precious of life that drives us. We're either going to run after it, and if we do happen to catch up to some of it, we'll hoard it, and that'll be our life. And what's really interesting, that every treasure demands so much of us. Sometimes it demands our very lives. And Jesus is the only treasure that He doesn't make the demand that you die to purchase it, because Jesus is the only one that has died to purchase you. He's the only one who could. Make Him your treasure. See that He's the treasure to you. See how He has treasured you. And then you'll be free from money blindness and greed and money sickness and all the other false priorities of our life. We always go to Jesus, I think, like this, and we think, well, I'm thinking of becoming a Christian, and I have a lot of investment, so Lord, you tell the stock market to stop fluctuating, and maybe I'll do you a deal. Or maybe we say, Lord, I'm thinking of becoming a Christian, and tell the firm to make me a partner, and maybe I'll do you a deal. Or I'm thinking of becoming a Christian, and tell the critics that I'm a really great singer, and maybe I'll do you a deal. And we come in at this level, and we say, Lord, I'm thinking about kind of getting to know you, and I see you're a great person, and I can't live without you. And Lord, get me the thing that I know is my life, that my money, and it may be money or other things. And in this case, it was my stingy brother who's holding on to more than he should. And Jesus says, no, I come in at this level. I'm not appointed to talk to you at this level about what it is you think you want, or these false sinners that you have in your life. I'm appointed to come down here and say, I have not come to give you things that you think you are your life. I have come to become your life. I have come to be your life. I came to set your life on fire. I came to revolutionize your life, not help you get to your agenda, but to have a whole new one. I came to give you an entire new agenda. And so, I ask you, church, once more this morning, are you building bigger barns? For what? Are you ready to be called home? Has the grammar of your life ever been predominantly the first person singular of I, or those possessive pronouns of my, myself? Are you rich toward God? Someone said greed is really just a way of dealing with our own feelings of deficit and emptiness. When we feel we are not enough, we get greedy. But in Jesus, we're enough. I was running this week with a group of people that I trained to do my ultra with, and occasionally will run with them. And somehow or another, we get on this robin story about this robin, in the backyard, and carefully scooping that little guy up, and felt so good to drop him in the nest, and just hoping that the mother accepts this thing, and hoping that maybe our life meant something that week, at least in that moment, at least to that bird family up underneath the eave in the backyard. And I'm telling this story, and one of the guys kind of clumped up in a group of 4 or 5 people, and one of the guys up to my left is real quiet, and he's usually talkative. And as I was telling the story of Emily Dickinson and telling the story of that little robin, how its beak opened up, just wanting water and nourishment, just wanting to live another few seconds even, few minutes, telling that story, we just kind of ran for a little bit, and then he breaks the silence. And what you don't know is his daughter died in a crash on Route 30 1 year ago. 1 year ago. And it sent him into a grieving tailspin. And I tell you what, God's using running to put me in places and with people that need Jesus. And it's crazy. But He's doing His thing. And I'm just like, God, you show me the way. You guide me in the process. I need evangelism connections. I need not just, I need to be out there with people who don't maybe think in church terms like, like maybe I'm used to, or maybe from religious backgrounds like I'm used to. I mean, God's just put me in these places where I'm just connecting with these people, and I'll be able to pray with some of them. It's just incredible. But anyway, he says, he said, you're not going to believe this, but my daughter Kayla from Columbia City 1 year ago died in a car wreck. She had that little Emily Dickinson poem phrase, if I can but help a robin to its nest again, I will not have lived in vain. 22 or 3 years of age when she, or maybe a little younger when she died. She had that tattooed on her body. Big tears. His anniversary's coming up of that death. And he needed to know that maybe God's not forgotten about him. That God still has paid attention and is paying attention to what's going on in his life. I never planned it. I never even prayed about it. It just happened. God just sent us a robin, sent the story, channeled it over there, went into this guy's heart, mind. Now, Lord's working. Lord's working. What about it? You've heard the message. You see the beauty of Jesus. Make him your love. Make him your life. Who knows what might happen? Will you pray with me? Actually, this morning, I want to do something, though. Before I do that, is I share with you that maybe you would have a response to the question,